Number 8. The Black Tomb. When you think of relics found in ancient Egypt, elaborately painted tombs and carved sarcophagi are probably what come to mind first. But in 2018, archaeologists unearthed a massive black granite sarcophagus that had been untouched for 2,000 years. Because of the terrible smell in the tomb, experts had to wear face masks when excavating the site. And this was before the coronavirus pandemic, so you know it was a legitimately disgusting smell. The source of the unbearable stench wasn't necessarily from the skeletons, but the red-brown sewage water that had leaked into the tomb. But enduring it was worth the discovery made inside. Hoping it could possibly contain the remains of Alexander the Great, archaeologists found not just one skeleton inside the coffin, but 3. Originally unearthed at a construction site, the sarcophagus was surveyed by a team of archaeologists under the command of Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities. After prying open the lid of the tomb about 2 inches, archaeologists were taken aback by the pungent smell that forced them from the site. It wasn't until later that they were able to pry it open completely with help from Egyptian military engineers, and they found the bones of 3 people inside. Sadly, the mummies, who were believed to be a family burial, weren't perfectly embalmed and had deteriorated. All their skin was gone, only their bones remained. Another theory about the contents of the sarcophagus include the possibility that the individuals inside were soldiers from the time of the pharaohs. One of the skulls of the victims of the skeletons had cracks that could be from an arrow injury. Inside the tomb, an alabaster bust was also located, but it was a victim of the elements and weathered beyond recognition. Still, the black granite sarcophagus in the tomb in which it was found is the largest of its kind ever discovered intact. Weighing 27 tons, the sarcophagus is believed to date from the early Ptolemaic period that began after the death of Alexander the Great. For now, though, archaeologists will continue to study the sarcophagus to try and determine when the occupants lived and how they died after ending up with such an unceremonious ending. Number 7. Smoked mummies. Would it surprise you to know that not only did cultures other than the ancient Egyptians mummify their dead, but that mummification still takes place in some areas of the world today? One look at the smoked corpses of Papua New Guinea, and you will see that the culture has a very different method of mummification. A fringe group living in the highland region perform a bizarre ritual to preserve the bodies of their dead. They smoke them over a fire. For many years, the people of remote villages have been performing this elaborate funeral procedure as a way to prevent the spirits of the dead from roaming the jungles, sabotaging their crops. It's an elaborate process that involves an ancient ceremony where the tribe mummified their dead sitting upright and subjecting the body to 3 months of smoking over a constant fire that preserves the body. The body is suspended over a fire and watched over by a group of men who are not allowed to leave the body at any time during the process. They are needed to tend to the body, which will bloat as it smokes, requiring the men to poke at it with wooden sticks to drain its fluids. Most importantly, the face must be kept intact, and after the process is complete, the body is smeared with red clay to maintain its structural integrity. Of course, this doesn't make them any less disturbing to look at. Some end up with parched sections of skin and muscles still clinging to their skeletons. Some still have portions of their hair intact, and their nails blacked and curled. The first reported sighting of these mummies took place in 1907, but with such secretive practices in remote villages, no one knows for sure just how long the macabre ritual has been taking place. They remain, even to this day, propped atop high cliffsides to look down upon the village below. Number 6. Massive Chinese settlement. A recent discovery of a stepped pyramid in China was just one of many surprises uncovered by archaeologists in 2018. The massive pyramid, with 11 separate platforms, which is part of an enormous walled settlement, was one of the most bizarre and impressive structures found left over from ancient China, a time before the Great Wall was even built. The ivory platforms of the stepped pyramid had sophisticated designs that provided defense and restricted access to those inside. Then, on top of that, this complex had residential structures, which leads experts to believe that the ruling Shimao elite lived there. Pottery and bronze artifact production was also done at the site. At the time the site was built, the Shimao took on large-scale building constructions and imported artifacts, showing the importance of economics and exchange in the ancient world. Located along a tributary of the Yellow River, the site was thought to be an important contact point in Central Plains. A massive 230 feet tall, the pyramid was seen from anywhere in the surrounding area. providing a constant reminder to the local population of those who ruled over them. 6 pits found on the site included decapitated human heads, evidence that human sacrifice on a massive scale often took place there. After several hundred years, the Shimao was eventually abandoned and fell into ruin. But as archaeologists continue to excavate, they are learning more about this Chinese civilization and hope to uncover why this once great settlement fell. Number 5. Mysterious stone etchings. In Central Europe, a chilling reminder of the past has appeared written on ancient stones. Boulders inscribed with cryptic messages known as hunger stones have appeared in the Czech Republic. Originally sitting below the waterline of the Elbe River, as the water levels receded, the carved rocks have been exposed to show their chilling messages. One of the oldest and most famous of the landmarks is known as Hunger Rock because of its inscription that dates back to 1616. The inscription, which translates to "If you see me, weep," is from 1616 and commemorates a number of droughts that go back as far as 1417. Another hunger stone in Germany is similar to the one found in the Czech Republic, with the message, "If you will again see the stone, so you will weep. So shall the water was in the year 1417. If you thought that was ominous, other stones say equally devastating phrases, including, we cried, and you will cry," as well as, "Who once saw me, he cried. Whoever sees me now will cry." Experts believe the stones were inscribed with mysterious messages as a result of drought and heat that not only brought crop failures, but also death by starvation. Many of the families living along the shore relied upon the river for their livelihoods, and as water levels sank, river transportation was harder, and they found it difficult to make a living. With the river at its lowest level in more than half a century, the stones are resurfacing and not only commemorate a trying time in history, but also offer a reminder to modern-day people that we are at the mercy of the elements for survival. Number 4. Brutalized Kenyan skeletons. A new study undertaken on skeletons unearthed in Kenya may offer experts a glimpse into the oldest known evidence of human warfare. 27 skeletons found in Africa from people who died 10,000 years ago show blunt force trauma and projectile wounds. Because the victims include men, women, and children, experts believe that the injuries were not suffered by individuals through murder or homicide. Instead, they believe the people were possibly part of a larger conflict. Discovered at a site called Naturak, the bones were located in 2012 on the southwest edge of Lake Turkana. The find was a unique one, providing direct evidence of warfare among ancient hunter-gatherers. Uncovered as part of a larger project, researchers were working to study the origin of Homo sapiens in the area when they made the discovery. Luckily, a settlement in the lake provided the perfect conditions to preserve the bones over millennia. Once buried in the lagoon, some of the bones were partially visible at the surface. As the archaeologists dug deeper, they found 27 skeletons, with some nearly complete and others just a few fragments. All of the remains dated to between 9,500 and 10,500 years ago. But researchers believe that people weren't deliberately buried there, and instead had fallen where they died. With blunt force trauma to their heads, as well as arrow wounds to their heads and necks, researchers believe the men, women, and children were all killed by bows and arrows, as well as wooden clubs. After studying the remains, experts believe that 2 warring groups clashed, resulting in the casualties. Even though it's difficult to determine why the violence occurred, the discovery shows that wars or warlike conflict were part of human nature, even between ancient humans. Do you think we'll ever achieve world peace? Or are humans just destined to fight with one another for as long as we coexist? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Then, remember to subscribe to Talltanic for more intense videos just like this one. Number 3. The Pit of Arms. A 6,000-year-old pit discovered near the border between Germany and France gave archaeologists a shock when they discovered an ancient pit filled with severed human arms, hands, and fingers. Discovered when an archaeological surveying company was overseeing excavations of a local property, a number of ancient pits known as silos were discovered. 60 silos were found during excavations, including 14 that contained human bones. But one silo, about 5 feet in diameter and 6.5 feet deep, was filled almost completely with human bones. Shockingly, all the bones showed cut or amputation marks that were made with either a knife or an axe. The oldest of the deposits dates to about 25,000 years ago and contained at least 7 severed upper limbs, including dismembered hands, fingers, and arms. Both adults and children were located in the pit, including an infant that was no more than a year old. Experts still don't know why this pit was so different from the others, which only contained bodies that showed little signs of violence. Due to the number of bodies located, archaeologists believe that the Neolithic people who used the silos were possibly engaged in some type of war, which was probably common in those days as groups fought over resources. The silos were a unique find on their own, but the one that stood out so starkly from the others was astonishing. It may not offer evidence as to why there was such violence, but it does offer insight into Neolithic societies and power struggles that may have taken place between these ancient people. Number 2. The Witch Chapel. A 15th century chapel in the Scottish city of Aberdeen was hiding a secret that shocked investigators. As historians studied the chapel, they located an iron ring set in the stone pillar of the church. During Aberdeen's Great Witch Hunt in the late 1500s, a trial and execution of 23 women and 1 man occurred in the city. According to experts, there were 2 places within the church that were reserved to imprison those accused of witchcraft. This included the stone wall to the Chapel of St. Mary, in a steeple that was at one time the tallest structure in the city. At the time of the witch hunts in Scotland, trials and executions were undertaken by royal commissions at the order of the king. Interestingly, historical records of the witch trials include payments made to a local blacksmith for the iron rings and shackles that were installed to imprison the witches at the church. City records have even detailed the rope and wood used to burn convicted witches at the stake. The Great Witch Hunt was just one phase of a wave of witch persecution across Scotland. King James VI of Scotland ordered that anyone accused of witchcraft should be burned at the stake, and it's often said that Aberdeen burned more witches than anywhere else in the world. Beginning in the 15th century, witchcraft persecutions began in Europe, reaching Scotland in the 1590s. Believing that witches communed with the devil, mobs chased down innocent people, who were then arrested, sentenced, and killed. As archaeologists undertook an excavation at the church before restoration work was done, they found the remains of more than 2,000 people, including 1,000 skeletons buried before the 1560s. Sadly though, for those whose ancestors were accused of witchcraft, no remains of the accused were found buried at the site, because at the time, the church would not allow those accused to be buried there, and instead buried them in unhallowed ground. But the iron ring discovered in the Aberdeen church is one link to a painful past of those Scottish citizens who were so wrongly persecuted. Number 1. Massive Greek Grave. A mass grave found near Athens in 2016 is believed to hold the remains of followers who tried to overthrow the leader of ancient Greece. Uncovered as archaeologists excavated a cemetery in the ancient port city of Phaleron. The complex, which dates to between the 8th and 5th centuries BC, was found to house a mass grave of ancient skeletons. But what was most surprising about the find was that many of the individuals were shackled. Of the 80 bodies found in the mass grave, 36 had their hands bound with iron shackles. Pottery shards found near the remains date to between 650 BC and 625 BC, around the same time that a group of prisoners tried to attempt a coup and take over the Acropolis. While the discovery was one that surprised history buffs, archaeologists have been aware of the existence of some of the graves for over a century, but as they started excavations over the area, they believe there could still be a minimum of 1,500 skeletons buried there. Creepy, no?
Number 9. Hegra. During the 1st century BC, an ancient group called the Nabateans established a bustling international trade hub in what is now northwestern Saudi Arabia. Known as Hegra or Madinah Saleh, the city was built at the foot of a basaltic plateau in the Hijaz Mountains. The builders took advantage of the landscape, carving intricate structures out of massive boulders. With elements of Greek, Roman, and other styles of architecture, the buildings resemble those of Petra, the Nabatean kingdom's capital, and its only city that was larger than Hegra. Before they came to dominate the incense and spice trades throughout much of the Middle East and the Mediterranean, the Nabateans were desert-dwelling Bedouin nomads. By the 4th century BC, they had become exorbitantly wealthy through their trading activities. They subsequently established Petra and Hegra as their designated commercial headquarters, using their sophisticated knowledge of the landscape to develop a water system that enabled them to survive in the harsh, unforgiving climate. Much of Hegra's history was lost after the Romans annexed the Nabatean kingdom in 106 AD. Aside from its elegant and grand houses of worship, monumental tombs, and other structures, the mysterious civilization left little behind for modern experts to learn from. Most of what we know about the Nabateans comes from Greek, Roman, and Egyptian documents. Cryptic inscriptions found on some of Hegra's tombs include intimidating warnings that trespassers will be cursed. Several high-ranking Nabatean officers and their families were laid to rest in the city, but the stories and history behind many of the tombs are still unknown, and for some reason, several of these buildings were abandoned when they were only partially finished. Number 8. Bagan. Bagan was a beautiful ancient city founded in Myanmar's Mandalay region during the 2nd century. It served as the capital of a Burmese dynasty called the Bagan Kingdom, which unified the regions that comprised modern-day Myanmar. As the kingdom's capital, Bagan functioned as a major political, economic, and cultural center that focused on both secular and religious studies. It had anywhere between 50,000 and 200,000 residents at its peak. Religion dominated the culture during the city's heyday, which lasted from the 11th to the 13th century. During that time, the surrounding Bagan plains had as many as 10,000 Buddhist temples, pagodas, and monasteries. But the people at Bagan were unusually tolerant and fluid for the time when it came to other belief systems, including Hinduism and animism. The bustling urban center collapsed in 1287 amid repeated Mongol attacks. Invading forces did very little physical damage to Bagan, but they reduced its population to the size of a small town. Following the empire's fall, the Minsang Kingdom became Burma's ruling power. Bagan's temples continued to serve as pilgrimage destinations for some time, but the structures were neglected and eventually fell into disrepair. Many of the temples were destroyed beyond repair when a major earthquake struck in 1975. During the 1990s, the Myanmar government attempted to restore some of these buildings, but its efforts were met with widespread criticism from experts who accused the restorers of failing to consider the original architectural styles. Then, in 2016, another earthquake struck, significantly damaging around 400 temples. Today, there are 2,200 remaining structures at Bagan, which is a popular tourist destination and one of Burma's only 2 designated UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Number 7. Kimun. During the 15th century BC, a kingdom called the Mitanni Empire ruled over an area that encompassed parts of modern-day Turkey, Syria, and Iraq. When it fell to the Assyrians sometime during the 14th or 13th century BC, the short-lived dynasty's culture was destroyed by its conquerors, leaving behind very little in the way of historical records and archaeological evidence. Consequently, the Mitanni people's origins, ethnicity, and lifestyle are a mystery. Even their capital, Taidu, has never been found. In 2019, a drought caused the waters of the Mosul Dam Reservoir in northern Iraq to recede, exposing the ruins of a Mitanni city called Kimun. Archaeologists discovered the site in 2010, but this was the first time water levels were low enough for them to actually explore the area. They identified a palace with 20-foot-high walls and chambers that once housed vivid paintings. Located to the south of the city, it overlooked the Tigris River from 65 feet away. The grand structure is one of just 4 Mitanni palaces ever discovered. Unlike the other 3, which sat on the outskirts of the empire, it was located at the center of Mitanni territory. The team also found 10 clay tablets inscribed with Mitanni cuneiform. It's one of the earliest known forms of writing. The translation of one tablet suggests that Kimun was originally called Zakiku. It wasn't long before the site was once again submerged, leaving the archaeologists with no choice but to wait until it's once again exposed to return. In a CNN interview at the time, excavation leader Ivana Puliz said that the team hoped to learn more about the mysterious civilization from the artifacts they collected. Number 6. Medieval Castle. For decades, the owners of Salton Hall, an ancient manor in Shropshire, England, wondered why there was a strange mound in their backyard. Knowing the property's history of human occupation goes back thousands of years, Tim Ashton and his family suspected that it might contain valuable clues about the manor's past. Archaeologists finally excavated the mound this year and found the remains of what appears to be a medieval castle. They believe it dates back to the 13th century and have so far uncovered a sandstone wall and wet timber that may have once been part of a moat bridge. In addition to the structures, the team found a medieval pilgrim's badge shaped like a small cross, which may have featured a figure of Jesus Christ at some point. Christians wore these souvenirs as they traveled to Catholic holy places. A volunteer also found a 13th century vessel called an ampulla, which pilgrims used for carrying holy water and oil. Sultan Hall was built during the 17th century, but wealthy members of society lived at the site as early as 1086 AD. Neolithic flints dating back roughly 5,500 years have also been found there, suggesting that the property's human history goes back much further. Have you ever found anything cool buried on your property? Let me know in the comments below, and if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Bangar Fort. In 1573, a ruler named Raja Bhagwan Singh built a sprawling fort for his son, Madho Singh, in what is now the state of Rajasthan in northern India. Known as the Bangar Fort, the site was a flourishing town with as many as 10,000 residents during its heyday. It was filled with grand temples, marketplaces, and stunning mansions or havelis. Several legends attempt to explain why Bangar Fort was ultimately abandoned. One story claims that a Hindu ascetic named Baba Balaknath insisted on having the settlement's tallest home and assured that the town would be destroyed if someone went against his wishes. When the fort was built, it cast a shadow on his dwelling, and he retaliated by cursing the structure. Another tale tells of a black magic magician who tried to woo a beautiful Bangar princess with a special love potion. She rejected him and threw the concoction at a boulder, triggering the giant rock to roll over the magician and crush him. That is a little harsh. As he lay dying, he cursed the fort, promising that it would become unlivable. Today, Bangar Fort is considered one of India's most haunted sites. Several people have died in accidents there, prompting the Archaeological Survey of India to ban overnight visitors. This was supposedly done for safety reasons, but some people believe that the authorities are trying to keep people out when spiritual activity is at its highest. Number 4. Merv. The ancient city of Merv was founded during the 6th century BC by the Persian Achaemenid Empire in the Karakum Desert of what is now southern Turkmenistan. Its advantageous location along the Silk Road trade route made it a highly sought-after prize for the Greeks, Arabs, and Turks, who all controlled the city at various points throughout its history. Merv peaked under the rule of the Seljuk Turks. By the 13th century, it was the world's biggest city, with a population of over 500,000 residents, and it continued to grow. The walled metropolis functioned as an oasis and an administrative and commercial center with sophisticated features including canals, gardens, reservoirs, bridges, greenery, streets, mosques, libraries, bathhouses, schools, markets, and more. It was also a cultural and educational center that attracted poets, musicians, astronomers, physicians, physicists, mathematicians, and other intellectuals. In 1221, Genghis Khan's son, Tului Khan, led a Mongol army into the city. The invaders laid siege to Merv, slaughtering somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million people, nearly the entire population. Then, they set fire to the metropolis. Merv was destroyed. Several rulers attempted to rebuild it, but they never managed to restore the once bustling urban center to its former glory. Looking at the decaying ruins of Merv today, it's hard to imagine it as a flourishing city. Number 3. Thulamela. The ancient city of Thulamela thrived between the 13th and 17th century in what is now Kruger National Park in South Africa. Today, the 22-acre site consists of several stone enclosures that sit on a hill. Thulamela's residents lived in what anthropologist Lynn Mescal described as a stratified society. Mescal believes that around 1,000 elites occupied the top of the hill, while around 2,000 members of other classes lived on the lower levels, although she admits that these numbers are purely speculative. Modern researchers named the city Thulamela. Nobody knows what its inhabitants actually called it. A park ranger rediscovered the settlement in 1983, and it was finally investigated during the 1990s after South Africa's racially divisive apartheid system ended. Porcelain, glass beads, and other objects found during excavations were traced to as far away as China and elsewhere, reflecting Thulamela's far-reaching ties with civilizations in North Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Archaeologists also found the burials of a seemingly royal couple that contained royal goods such as gold necklaces, bangles, beads, and other jewelry. In addition to working with gold, Thulamela's residents also crafted bronze, iron, and copper objects. Some of their creations resemble items found at other archaeological sites, including Mapungubwe in modern-day northern South Africa and Great Zimbabwe in what is now the country of Zimbabwe. The prosperous city was abandoned during the 17th century for unknown reasons. According to the study, evidence shows that Thulamela began drying out in the years leading to its desertion. It's likely that various factors contributed to the settlement's downfall, including civil war, an increased Portuguese colonial presence, but for now, experts admittedly do not have the full picture of exactly what happened to this once thriving metropolis. Number 2. Ur. The Bible mentions an ancient Sumerian city-state called Ur. It's the place that Abraham left behind when he relocated to Canaan at God's instruction. While many people doubt the Bible's claims, understandably so, Ur was actually a real place. In fact, it became a prosperous trade hub even before it was mentioned in scripture. Founded around 3800 BC or perhaps even earlier in what is now Iraq, this powerful Persian Gulf port city had as many as 80,000 residents at its peak. Ur was continuously inhabited until around 450 BC, when climate change and the overuse of land prompted the population to flee northward to more fertile territory. Italian explorer Pietro della Valle rediscovered Ur in 1625. While traveling through the area, he noticed bricks and other artifacts bearing strange inscriptions. At the time, the city's ruins were buried beneath the sand. British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the site in 1922 and found that Ur is largely reduced to rubble. The city's most visible surviving remnant is a partially restored ziggurat that was unearthed during the 1930s. It was originally built during the 21st century BC and was rebuilt under Babylonian's last king, Nabonidus, during the 6th century BC. Time and the elements have transformed the coastline. What's left of Ur sits much further inland than it did during its heyday, when it was a coastal city located near the mouth of the Euphrates River. The ruins are helping archaeologists learn more about the culture that built and lived in Ur, but their knowledge is limited by what little is available at the site, and there are still many mysteries surrounding the ancient city. Number 1. Chalatzingo. Around 1500 BC, an ancient settlement called Chalatzingo sprang up in Mexico's Central Highlands. They developed a complex culture around 900 BC, around the same time that one of Mesoamerica's oldest civilizations, the Olmecs, established a presence in the region. Elements of the architecture and artistic style found at Chalatzingo indicate that its inhabitants were Olmec settlers or had close ties to the Olmecs. Images of large-toothed wildcats at the site suggest that the city's residents shared in the Olmec worship of the jaguar. The artwork includes depictions of big cats with beaks and other unnatural features, as well as felines engaging in violent acts. One carving shows a ferocious jaguar disemboweling a human. The settlement was situated along intersecting trade routes that connected the Olmecs with Mesoamerican societies throughout Mexico. At its peak, Chalatzingo was home to somewhere between 500 and 1,000 residents who grew staple crops like corn. They nourished their fields with water from a nearby mountain stream. Chalatzingo experienced an abrupt decline around 500 BC, around the same time that the Olmec civilization collapsed. Researchers believe that environmental factors are responsible for the Olmec's fall outside Chalatzingo. While these events did not directly affect the city, its population likely suffered a cultural decline and economic hardship resulting from decreased trade and contact with other groups. The Olmec's origins are unknown, and nobody knows how widespread the civilization really was. And while the Aztecs called them the Olmecs, we don't know for sure what they called themselves. Experts know very little about their religion beyond their apparent jaguar worship and evidence indicating that they had some sort of organized belief system and priesthood. Until or unless more discoveries are made, our understanding of this early Mesoamerican society will remain incomplete.
Number 10. Tibetan capala skulls. Tibetan capala skulls are some of the creepiest archaeological relics anywhere in the world. These bizarre skulls were used as bowls or vessels in rituals for both Hindus and Buddhists. Each skull was carved with decorative designs and usually embedded with jewels. And yes, they were made from real human skulls, usually collected from burial sites. But they weren't taken from any ordinary burial sites. It was, and still is, a Tibetan burial custom to chop up the bodies of the dead and then scatter their remains over the mountain plains. These are called sky burials, and it is where the capala skulls would be pillaged from. These skulls were used in Tibetan monasteries, usually to hold wine and bread, which symbolized flesh and blood in rituals. The bread would be shaped to look like human eyes and ears before being eaten out of the skull. And although these things were normally used for ordinary spiritual purposes, some people used them for the dark arts. Sometimes, a capala was fashioned from the skull of a murdered victim or someone who was sacrificed. These would then be used in dark rituals, because it was believed the skull of someone who died violently possessed more power. Number 9. The arm of Saint John the Baptist. There is a creepy relic being kept in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, said to be the right arm of John the Baptist. The arm was apparently transported from Antioch to Constantinople in the year 956 by Emperor Constantine VII. It was brought to the Church of the Virgin of the Lighthouse and kept in the treasury. The arm was seized by the Ottomans in 1453 when they conquered the city, but then in 1585 it was returned by Sultan Murad III. It remained in Topkapi Palace ever since. The arm, although it may look like the arm of a robot, is indeed the arm of a skeleton encased inside of a gold-embellished silver reliquary. But just where did the arm come from in the first place? According to written history, it was Luke the Evangelist who went to the place of John's burial and took the right arm himself. This is because John's right arm was the one that baptized Jesus. The actual arm that performed Jesus' baptism is obviously considered to be one of the holiest relics in the world. There's been no scientific proof that the arm does indeed belong to anyone named John the Baptist, the fabled man who defied King Herod and was beheaded for it. But still, the arm has been spoken of in the historical texts for nearly 2,000 years. It could very well be the real deal, though it's definitely creepy. Number 8. The Family Cat. An urban explorer was shocked when he went to investigate an abandoned house that had been left to rot and discovered a creepy doll and the skeleton of an old cat. This happened in Scotland, and the house was probably abandoned sometime in the early 1970s. It was found by a guy named Adam Mark, who thought it would be a good idea to go exploring through the house's decaying rooms. The place definitely seemed like it could be haunted, and he reported that he felt the sense he wasn't alone while he went from room to room. He found the house in the same state it was when whoever had owned it packed up and left. Except they didn't really pack up anything at all. All the creepy antiques were still on the mantels. The cupboards were filled with antique dishes and tea sets. And they even had forgotten their cat. Adam found the forgotten feline mummified on the floor. There was even a creepy doll with its eyes missing, just sitting in a chair and seemingly staring at something outside the window. He described the atmosphere as dark and extremely eerie. And to make things even creepier, Adam claims that he found police tape outside the house, suggesting it may have been the scene of some kind of terrifying crime. Hey, Adam, I think it's called trespassing. Number 7. Ritual beheading. Recent evidence has uncovered what might just be the oldest case of ritual beheading anywhere in the Americas. A decapitated human was discovered inside a rock shelter in Brazil. After dating the skeletal remains, scientists learned the person had their head cut off somewhere between 9,100 and 9,400 years ago. But they didn't just get their head cut off, as the ancient person was also found with the right hand amputated and pressed against the left side of their face. This is an obvious sign of ritualistic activity, though nobody can really say what the unusual ritual detailed or what its exact purpose was. The discovery keeps getting worse and worse. Scientists learned that the man was decapitated by a series of painful blows from a sharp instrument hitting him in the neck, but evidence also showed that his head was twisted in some places, meaning whoever was trying to cut it off had to twist it around a bunch, like ripping the head off a doll. Ouch! It's now clear that almost 10,000 years ago, during the Neolithic period, the barbaric tribes throughout America had a fascination with rituals and were inclined to decapitate people. Number 6. The Headless Man. A woman discovered the creepiest photo ever hidden in a room in her house. This happened back in January of this year, when the woman and her husband found a secret room inside the house they had just recently moved into. They were taking down layers of wallpaper stacked on top of one another when they found the entrance to the creepy room, which had no windows and was completely dark. It was within this room that the woman found a black and white photograph showing a young boy sitting in front of a garage inside a toy car. This itself isn't all that weird. The creepy part is what's behind the little boy. Standing a few feet back was a headless man in a white jacket. His arms hang casually by his sides. He has absolutely no head, and he looks like a monster from a horror movie. It's unlikely that the person in the photo was really missing their head though. They probably used some kind of light trick to make them look headless in the photo. They then maybe placed the photo in the secret room because they knew it would scare the pants off of whoever found it. Either that, or the people who had lived in the house before really were a bunch of creeps, perhaps dabbling in some evil dark magic. The question here is, if the headless man in the photo was intentional, why? Why do you think? Let us know in the comment section down below. And if you're enjoying this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 5. Giant Cave Spider. A creepy new species of spider has been discovered in a Mexican cave. Scientists say the spider is about the size of a softball. Yikes. Even if you're not an arachnophobe, you have to appreciate the horror of a spider that's about the size of your fist. Did you just hold your fist up to compare size? Yikes again. It was found by researchers working with the San Diego Natural History Museum. Jim Berrien and his team discovered this freaky arachnid while exploring the mountains of Baja California Sur. When they went deep into the cave, they found a massive exoskeleton suspended from the ceiling. They realized the cave was probably full of all kinds of spooky critters, so they went back at night and began hunting for spiders in the darkness. They've called this new species the Sierra Cacachilas wandering spider. Maria Jimenez, a local spider expert, said that she was impressed with how big the spider is, going on to say that in all her years studying spiders in Baja California, she had never seen one so large. The body is about an inch long, and the legs are about 4 inches across. About 24 of these 8-legged creepy crawlies were found inside the cave, suggesting that the species must have evolved only within its confines, never expanding into the world outside. And this is good news, because the spider is absolutely terrifying. It's not fatal if it bites you, but it's still pretty freaky. Someone should check to see if a bite from the newly discovered spider gives you Spider-Man powers. Number 4. Haunted Hotel. An extremely creepy discovery has been made in a Texas salon when a woman discovered a secret door that led to a haunted hotel behind a mirror. According to the original story, the woman had experienced a nightmare in which there was a secret door behind a mirror in her salon. And so, when she went into work the next day, she decided to investigate. Much to her dismay, there really was a secret door when she removed the mirror. The portal had been filled up and blocked with concrete from the other side, but the door was definitely there. Here's where things get extra creepy. The salon is attached to the infamously haunted Rogers Hotel, which was built in the early 1800s and then remodeled in 1912. As part of the remodeling, the door was likely sealed leading into the salon. At one point, the two were connected, though nobody can say why. As for why the Rogers Hotel is haunted, local legend says that there have been several deaths in the hotel, including the daughter of Rogers himself, who allegedly drowned in a pool in the basement. People who visit the hotel sometimes claim to see bottles of water across the floor, and sometimes even the silhouette of a wet child. Do you think it's a coincidence that this Texas woman had a nightmare about the secret door only to discover it truly existed? Do you think something sinister provoked her to check? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Number 3. Shipwreck Skeleton. In 1984, underwater archaeologist Barry Clifford stumbled upon the wreckage of the Whydah Galley, the only verified pirate shipwreck from the Golden Age of piracy ever discovered. The Golden Age of piracy lasted between 1650 and 1720. At the time, archaeologists were able to bring to the surface a whole heap of interesting artifacts from the vessel. However, it wasn't until recently that they found 6 skeletons trapped inside the underwater wreckage. The Whydah Galley was stolen by Sam Bellamy, a pirate who arrived in Cape Cod back in 1715 and set off in his pirate ship looking for treasure. He managed to take over 53 ships throughout his life as a pirate, becoming one of the wealthiest raiders of the sea in history. However, after capturing the Whydah, Bellamy's luck ran out. In April of 1717, the ship became enveloped in a blanket of thick fog off the coast of Massachusetts, hit a sandbar, and sank. Only 6 out of the 144 crew members survived, and the ship was lost for over 260 years. Since its discovery, at least 200,000 pieces of artifacts have been excavated. The most recent discovery of the creepy bones has proved quite fascinating, as one of the leg bones is speculated to belong to the pirate captain himself. Number 2. Bog Buddies. 2,400 years ago, a man was buried in a bog. We don't know his name or why exactly he was buried, but we do know he was between 30 and 40 years old, and that the acidic peat of the bog mummified his body to perfection. His hair, brain, and fingernails have all been perfectly preserved. Even the noose was still stuck around his neck. He was obviously hanged, but scientists have no idea as to why. This particular bog body is nicknamed the Talltanic Man, and he was found in Denmark back in the 1950s. In 2021, scientists finally did a bit of dissecting on the bog man to discover what he ate for his last meal. They found that he ate porridge made from barley, flax, and plant seeds before being hung and then tossed into the bog. What's strange about this is the fact that he had seeds in his porridge. Seeds were not typically part of the Iron Age diet, suggesting whoever killed this guy had given him a special meal with special ingredients, perhaps as some kind of mysterious human sacrifice ritual. He's currently on display at the Silkeborg Museum. Number 1. Ancient Stone Mask. A very creepy stone mask was recently unveiled by the Israel Antiquities Authority. The mask dates back to the Neolithic period, about 9,000 years ago. It's incredibly rare, crafted from stone, and nobody knows where it was originally found. The mask was actually recovered by an antiquities theft prevention unit back in 2018. Nobody knows where the person who acquired it got it from originally, leaving this artifact a total mystery. The mask looks oddly like the creepy mask that Jim Carrey wore in the movie The Mask, though this one probably doesn't have any magical powers. 4 holes were found drilled along its perimeter, likely used to tie it to a person's face. Why anyone would wear such a horrifying thing is beyond reason. But then again, this was nearly 10 millennia ago. The mask has eye holes, a small slit for breathing, and even teeth traced around the mouth. It definitely has something to do with a creepy prehistoric ritual, but scientists can't say for sure. Nothing else like it has ever been found. Number 10. Hero Pilot. The remains of a bomber pilot who sacrificed himself during World War II to save his crew have been found 74 years after his heroic death. His remains were discovered 230 feet underwater off the coast of Croatia. His name was Second Lieutenant Ernest Vieno, and he vanished on November 6, 1944, while flying his B-17 bomber and being attacked by anti-aircraft guns. He managed to land the aircraft in the sea so that his crew could escape. Nice guy. However, he was not as lucky, and he went down with the bomber as it sank below the waves to Davy Jones's locker. The army told his family that he was lost at sea, and that was the end of it. At least it was, until Steve Jones, who runs a local dive center, discovered the ghostly bomber back in 2016. It's still sitting at the bottom of the ocean. Amazingly, the pilot's body was still inside. He wasn't alone either. Algae and all kinds of fish had been keeping him company. The craft itself was in surprisingly good condition too, looking as though it had landed peacefully at the bottom of the ocean, never to start its propellers up again. Ernest's family has requested that if the divers ever return to the wreck, they leave flowers on the co-pilot's seat. Number 9. Air Raid Shelter. A woman named Mia Gray found an air raid shelter from World War II in her Scottish tenement. The shelter had remained concealed underneath a literal mountain of junk for decades. It's not really clear if Mia was a hoarder or not, but she had been living in the house for about 4 years before she finally decided to clean out the old Victorian washroom in the basement. She knew it was full of junk when she moved in, but just never had the time to organize all the stuff or get it out. When she finally did remove all the junk, she found that the vintage washroom was actually an air raid shelter, intended to keep a small group of people safe in case of a bombing. The room had bunk beds, a small stove, and even a reinforced roof. And to think this was right under her nose the entire time. She told news outlets, "I just thought it was amazing to see it. A real piece of social history. but I didn't have any idea whether it was a common thing. I'd lived in tenements before that hadn't had the basement area, so I wasn't sure if this was an unusual find. Yes, Mia, it is still an incredible find. Mia's tenement building is in Edinburgh, and even though Edinburgh wasn't a major priority for the Germans to bomb, the German Luftwaffe still conducted at least 18 devastating bombing raids on the Scottish capital, killing an estimated 20 people. So, many of these air raid shelters were built, even if a lot of them didn't need to be used. During the Second World War, it was always better to be safe than sorry. Number 8. Mass Grave. Just last year in 2020, archaeologists discovered a mass grave from World War II in Poland that shows the sadistic evidence of a Nazi massacre. The massive burial pit was found to contain the bodies of at least 500 people, as well as the wedding rings, the bullets used to shoot them, and other personal belongings. It was quite the discovery. Archaeologists were excavating a place in Poland, locally known as Death Valley, where it's been estimated that somewhere around 35,000 Polish civilians were brutally executed by the Nazi soldiers between October and November of 1939. It's known today as the Pomeranian Crime of 1939. But this newest massacre was from January of 1945. It was the second great massacre to take place in Death Valley. The Gestapo marched about 600 Polish prisoners into the rural area and executed them one by one. Ever since then, the locals were acutely aware that there were probably a pretty large number of bodies buried somewhere out in the woods, but they had never been found until now. 75 years later, the evidence of the horror that happened here was finally found. Despite the Nazis' efforts to hide the crimes, material evidence of the murders is preserved to this day. After the bodies are inspected, they'll be given proper burials in a nearby cemetery. Number 7. German U-boat. The wreckage of the most advanced U-boat in Nazi Germany has just been discovered. This beast of a machine was sunk in 1945. It was a Type 21 submarine, a U-3523. According to the Smithsonian Institute, the sub may have been trying to smuggle the highest-ranking members of the Nazi Party into Argentina when it was destroyed. This was the most advanced long-range sub the Third Reich ever developed. It had an impressive and advanced design for traveling long distances, which would have made it the perfect vessel for bringing a group of fleeing Nazis across the world as the war came to a screeching end. The submarine was found by a research ship in Denmark that was scanning the seabed off the coast. The submarine appeared on the ship's sonar sitting 400 feet under the water, with its nose buried in the dirt and twisted at a 45-degree angle. The submarine was fleeing Europe on May 6, 1945. This was just 2 days after Nazi troops in Denmark surrendered. A British bomber spotted the submarine and dropped depth charges, sinking the vessel and killing whoever was on board, then leaving it to sink to the bottom of the ocean. Are researchers going to be able to open the sunken sub and see if it's really full of gold or Nazi high rollers? Well, since it's considered a war grave, almost all signs point to no. How many submarines like this do you think are out there? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. And if you're liking this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. Number 6. Giant Bomb. The discovery of a giant bomb in North Carolina prompted a new wave of warnings from the Marine Corps, telling people to stay away from Browns Island. A 250-pound A-1 variant bomb from World War II was found under the water during high tide, and the explosive ordnance disposal technicians had to quickly identify the explosive and then destroy it in a controlled blast. Even though the bomb was decades old, the strength of its explosion was powerful enough that it would have blown apart any watercraft unfortunate enough to accidentally bump into it. But here's the deal. The giant bomb was basically found floating near Browns Island, an island that's off limits to the public because it's a weapons testing facility. This place has been used for years to test out bombs. But in more recent years, the area around the island has become popular with recreational boaters, elevating the fears of military personnel. Even though the military is warning people to stay away, people on their boats don't really care. This recent bomb scare ended up being harmless, but it very easily could have been a weakened fisherman who found their boat being blown to smithereens. Number 5. Pilot's Uniform. An official military uniform that once belonged to a pilot with the Royal Air Force was recently discovered, all wrapped in old newspapers. Inside a house in East Staffordshire in the UK, a very old parcel was discovered, still wrapped in twine. The house went up for auction after the old man who lived in it died. His house was being cleared, and his belongings were being packed up to sell at auction. One of the auctioneers pulled a parcel out from under the deceased old man's bed. When he unwrapped the twine, he discovered the RAF pilot uniform that was worn by crew members between 1941 and 1943, and it was in perfect condition. According to his family, the jacket probably belonged to either the old man or his brother. Almost just as cool as the pilot's uniform was the newspaper it had been bundled up in. The issue was from the year 1951. It was a page out of the Daily Express with an article explaining what a boss looks for in the ideal female secretary. What do you think the article said? Let us know in the comment section down below. Number 4. Fighter on the Beach. Debbie Hartley, 51, and Graham Holden, 54, from the United Kingdom, were strolling along the beach walking their dog when they came across some pieces of metal sticking out of the sand. The metal was part of the wreckage of a very rare Royal Air Force fighter plane from World War II. The piece had been stuck in the beach sand for 76 years. Amazingly, no one had seen the wrecked vehicle until just recently. We were trying to work out what it was and just stood around there for 45 minutes. I have never seen something so amazing before in my life. It was a 1 in a million find. It feels like you stumbled upon a bit of history. It was just amazing. After the discovery went viral, the Royal Air Force confirmed the wreckage was that of a Bristol Bow fighter. They even managed to track down its serial number and figure out that it had flown with the 254 Squadron. It participated in night missions under the cover of darkness to torpedo enemy ships sailing in the North Sea. But in 1944, one of its engines blew off to takeoff, and it had to make an emergency landing on the UK's Cleethorpes beach. It was left there and then buried in sand, forgotten for the next 7 decades. What's the coolest thing you ever found on the beach? Number 3. German Panther tank. A man in Germany has been given a massive fine of 250,000 euros, equivalent to about $297,000, for holding onto a Panther tank from World War II. This guy not only had a legendary Panther tank in his basement that weighed 40 tons, he also had a full collection of military memorabilia, including dozens of rifles and machine guns, about 1,000 rounds of live ammunition, a torpedo, and an 88mm anti-aircraft cannon. This guy was ready to walk right into World War II and start shooting. The Panther tank was introduced to the war in the year 1943 and was one of the best German tanks ever built. The anti-aircraft gun that the man was holding onto was one of the most devastating weapons of the war, able to take out ships, aircraft, and tanks from 9 miles away. The discovery of all these things came in July of 2015 when authorities received a tip about the collection in the man's basement. His home had been searched before by authorities looking for stolen Nazi art. It also didn't help that the guy had fired up the tank during a bad winter to help his neighbors plow snow from the road. Can you imagine? Unfortunately for the collector, he now has to give up all his stuff, and he has to pay a giant fine for hoarding illegal weapons and an illegal military tank. Between having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars or wading into the hell that is arguing with your homeowners association, one thing is clear: it's probably not worth it to keep a tank at your house. Number 2. Lost body. The body of a German soldier who died during the war has just been found buried in a field in the Netherlands. The person who found the body was searching for treasure with a metal detector. The metal detectorist picked up pings from beneath the ground, signaling that there was some metal down there. So naturally, he started digging. Not only did he find pieces of ammunition and the soldier's dog tag, he found the soldier himself. As you can imagine, he quickly called the authorities. They then did an investigation and found that the German soldier had most likely died during Operation Market Garden. The operation had been carried out in 1944 by Allied forces trying to liberate the Netherlands from the Germans. thousands of paratroopers jumped out of planes and liberated a handful of areas. This German was probably shot down during the fighting and then buried in an unmarked grave. But because of Germany's privacy laws, they have yet to give out his name or properly identify him to the public. Number 1. Nazi Hideout. 600 miles from Buenos Aires, in the remote region of Misiones, Tim Kennedy, with the US Army Special Forces, went hunting for proof that Hitler ran away to Argentina after his brutal defeat at the end of World War II. Kennedy believed Hitler fled to hide out in the jungle. He was joined by archaeologist Philip Kiernan, and together they investigated a trio of stone structures far from any road and far from civilization, filled with dozens of strange artifacts. These artifacts included things like cans of corned beef and dehydrated milk, along with an engraved box from 1940. Inside the box, the researchers found Nazi coins minted by the Third Reich, as well as a photograph of a kid in a Nazi uniform, and a photo of Hitler and Mussolini, the Italian dictator. This is pretty obvious proof that the decaying jungle structures had been used by Nazis hiding from the world. It's not direct evidence that Hitler himself had used the bunkers, but it definitely shows that, in 1945, when things went sour for the Nazis, many of them retreated to the South American jungles. Do you think Hitler really ran away to Argentina after the war?
Number 8. Littlefoot. In the late 1990s, archaeologists found a nearly complete skeleton of the elusive Australopithecus, which they then named Littlefoot. Do you think they knew that Littlefoot was the name of the main character in the Land Before Time movies? Or do you think that it was just a coincidence that they named a prehistoric discovery the same thing? Regardless, after being found in a cave system in South Africa, the discovery was a coup, considering most fossils of the prehistoric relatives of humans are usually partial skulls, jawbones, teeth, or fragments of limb bones. So how did this specimen survive intact for so long? Excavating the skeleton from the underground cave chamber, archaeologists had to remove it from calcified deposits, the first time an Australopithecus was found this way. As researchers tried to find out the age of the remains, they made the mistake of dating the calcified casings, which was the fluid that formed and hardened around the bones, giving them a dating that was much younger than the bones. It took a team of French specialists to determine that the voids were filled after an ancient collapse, dating Littlefoot to around 3 million years old. Cleaning and studying the bones, researchers were able to pinpoint the age of the skull, arms, legs, pelvis, and other bones located in the cave. Since 1936, large numbers of Australopithecus fossils have been found in South Africa, but this one belongs to Prometheus australopithecus, an ancestor of a group of early primates that lived alongside early ancestors of humans for about 1 million years. Standing about 4 feet 2 inches, Littlefoot was an adult female that took 20 years to excavate because the fossil had to be dug out by hand instead of blasting the rock, which would have damaged it. Still, it is a very important find in archaeology circles, one that was worth the wait. Every little individual discovery counts. Number 7. Iron Age murder victim. It's not strange for construction workers to unearth historical finds while digging to build new roads or buildings, but a group working just outside London, England found something peculiar. They uncovered the skeleton of a man face down in a ditch with his hands bound in front of him. Even though the bindings used to restrain him had long since rotted away, his hands remained trapped under his pelvis. Even more fascinating is the fact that the body wasn't in a grave or coffin, but archaeologists examining the body did find pottery fragments that might help them determine when the unfortunate man lived. Discovered about 15 miles northwest of London, the body was found on a farm that was near an ancient road known as the Icknield Way, and was used as a travel route since prehistoric times. It isn't the only historical discovery made in the area. Many ancient sites are nearby, including relics from nearly 4,000 years of human occupation stretching from the Neolithic to the medieval periods. Remnants of pens for animals and food pits were also found where the bound man was located, but another grave which was found nearby had a lead-lined coffin which was more ornate than the suspected murder victim. 2 very different burials in one location after a unique glimpse into the Bronze Age and how ancient people lived and died in England. Number 6. Ancient Mummy's Voice. You might be terrified of ancient curses, but for scientists, anytime a mummy is found from ancient Egypt is a cause for celebration. Researchers and Egyptologists agree they're a fascinating look into how life and death were celebrated by the people who lived along the Nile. But is there a better way to hear about life in ancient times? According to researchers who decided to recreate the vocal tract of a 3,000-year-old mummy, there may be. It might sound like the beginning of a bad horror movie, but using medical scanners, 3D printing, and an electronic larynx, researchers were able to recreate how the ancient mummy would have sounded. When scientists tested their creation, they were able to get a single sound from the Egyptian priest Nasiamen, whose mummified body was used for the experiment. Sounding somewhere between the vowels in bed and bad, the tone isn't exactly how the priest would have sounded in real life, given the fact that his tongue has lost most of its bulk over the 3,000 years since he was mummified. Hoping to continue their work to recreate the mummy's voice for future experiences, where the public might be able to hear the priest's voice at places like Karnak, archaeologists will continue to work on creating entire words and sentences direct from the mummy's mouth. Creepy, isn't it? Number 5. Belgian Bone Cathedral. A gruesome secret was lying beneath the foundation of a Belgian cathedral, and when experts uncovered the find, they were understandably shaken. A 500-year-old partition was found in the city of Ghent, but this was no ordinary wall. It was made from human bones. Built in the 17th century, the Gothic Cathedral of St. Bavo was built on the site of the former chapel of St. John the Baptist, originally constructed in 942. So how did the bones get there, and why were they stacked to create a wall? Experts believe that when the new cathedral was being built, the bones in the original cemetery had to be cleared for construction. Since the faithful believed in the resurrection of the body, the bones were considered the most important part, so rather than throw them away, it seems they were moved and used as building materials. The theory also started to hold more weight when researchers dated the bones to be about 200 years old when they were used to construct the wall. Made up of mostly adult thigh and shin bones, the wall also had fragments from shattered skulls intersped throughout. The structure, intentionally built with human bones, stunned archaeologists, who say human remains are normally stored in loose dirt pits filled with bones or ossuaries, which are stone buildings built next to the walls as city graveyards to store skeletal remains. 9 walls were uncovered during the excavation, and even though they seem similar to the catacombs in Paris, where skeletal remains are gathered and preserved in underground crypts, the folks in charge of St. Bavo's Cathedral have no plans to create a similar tourist attraction. Number 4. Peruvian Zoo Burials. An ancient cemetery that had been used in the final stage of a bloody occupation of Lima, Peru 1,300 years ago is being unearthed and reveals a multitude of new discoveries. A series of excavations at a pre-Hispanic cemetery found in 2018 have revealed new human burials of 2 adults and 1 child. Located in a squat position with their legs bent, the adults were found next to a pottery vessel. Another burial of a person laying on their side with their head turned to the ground suggests they may have been an offering to the gods. Interestingly, the bodies were found at the Parque de las Leyendas Zoo, which is home to over 200 animals and also houses a botanical garden. But the main attraction to archaeologists is the site of the ancient city of Maranga, which is where the bodies were found. When the city was at its peak, it was home to huge monuments, temples, and palaces over a 4 million square meter site, one of Peru's largest. Because it was such a large city, it's no surprise that bodies have been unearthed there. But another find in 2018 of around 140 children between ages 5 and 14 was a shocker. All of the skeletons had lesions on their breastbones, which, along with dislocated rib cages, leads researchers to believe they were involved in some sort of sacrificial removal of their hearts. Finds like this might seem shocking, but they provide insight to archaeologists about how these ancient cultures lived, what they ate, and any diseases they may have suffered from. They also provide insight into funerary and ritualistic practices that might seem strange in modern times, but were important to these ancient cultures. Have you ever stumbled upon a grave somewhere that you didn't expect? Perhaps in the woods near your house, or at a summer camp, or in a farmer's field? Tell me about it in the comments below, then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more intense videos. Number 3. Sonbelek Slab. Imagine finding a strange carved piece of stone in your backyard from almost 4,000 years ago. That happened recently when a long-lost stone slab originally found in a French parish ended up being a very important relic from the Bronze Age. It was first discovered around 1900, but was left in a dusty corner of a museum for a century before scientists analyzed it and realized what it was. Dating to between 2150 and 1600 BCE, the slab was partly broken with its upper part missing, but along its surface, distinct carvings are visible. Engraved with lines and intricate motifs, it is not only believed to be a cartographic representation of a territory in Europe, it is also believed to be the oldest map of Europe ever found. Repeated motifs and lines represent the valley of the River Odette, with various lines depicting the river network. Made to represent an area that measures over 20 miles by 13 miles, the slab was unearthed in western Brittany from burial mounds used in ancient rites at the end of the early Bronze Age. Before the slab was removed, it measured almost 13 feet long and formed the wall of a coffin-like box with human remains. No ordinary slab, it was purposely designed to be three-dimensional with a valley and lines to depict three different river springs that have clearly been around for thousands of years since the dawn of civilization. Experts believe the map may have once been used by a Bronze Age prince or king to mark his ownership over a particular area, and the fact that it was buried could have marked the end of their reign or possibly a rejection by the masses he ruled over. Either way, this stone slab, forgotten for decades, was luckily rediscovered, so its importance could be celebrated. Number 2. The Lost Golden City of Luxor. You might think that Akhenaten had an easy life ruling ancient Egypt, but something must have appeared in Thebes for him to not only abandon the city, but to ditch his name and his religion too. 3,400 years ago, the pharaoh left everything behind in the capital of what is now modern-day Luxor, only to set up shop in a new city bearing his name, Akhenaten. There, he ruled alongside his wife Nefertiti, but it didn't last for long. After he died, his son took over rule and turned his back on his father's legacy. Evidence of this strange turn of events was found at a newly discovered royal metropolis, the lost Golden City of Luxor. Inherited from his father Amenhotep III, the city was discovered in 2020, a remarkably preserved, sprawling site that continues to stun researchers. But the site, which was a hub of wealth, power, and luxury, was later abandoned by Akhenaten when he turned his back on all the traditional Egyptian gods, choosing to only worship the sun god Aten. He even went so far to change his name from Amenhotep IV to his new moniker, which means devoted to Aten. Researchers have so far discovered 2 mortuary temples. Between the two, archaeologists expected to find funerary items for Tutankhamun, but instead they uncovered zigzagging mud brick walls with ancient artifacts emblazoned with the royal seal of Amenhotep III. Decorative and ritual objects like scarab beetles and amulets certainly have the city living up to its name, because these finds are definitely worth their weight in gold to archaeologists who are starting to see the vibrant life of these ancient families who once ruled the sands of Egypt. Number 1. Lost Viking ships. Known as an unstoppable force of history, the Vikings were known for not only trading on 4 continents, but their savage raids on nations they saw as competition. The discovery of 2 ships near Estonia, filled with slain warriors, offer a glimpse to their reign. Dozens of men were found on the 2 ships, with 7 lying haphazardly in the smaller boat. 33 additional men were found in the larger vessel, buried in a neat pile with their weapons and animals stacked with them. Archaeologists think the men died in a battle around 700 or 750, which is actually almost a century before the Viking Age officially began. To find the boat from a time when long-distance voyages were uncommon was a unique discovery, but it almost didn't happen. Workers digging trenches for electrical cables on the island of Salme found human bones, and after calling in local authorities, a spearhead and carved bone gaming piece were also found. Digging deeper to get a better picture of what they discovered, archaeologists were shocked to see the trace of a boat's hull. Even though most of the timber had rotted away, they uncovered 275 iron rivets, which would have held the boat together and helped them trace the outlines of the 38-foot-long boat. Among the bones, which belonged to men aged 18 to 45, a number of knives, whetstones, and a bone comb were also found with the slain crew. Remarkably, a second similar boat was found 2 years later, just 100 feet away from the first. With the boat found at the Salmis site, it pushed the first evidence of sailing back a century or more. The second boat, stretching 55 feet long and 10 feet wide, is believed to be the oldest sailing vessel ever found in the Baltic Sea. 2 summers of excavation at the second site uncovered 33 bodies stacked 4 deep. The similarities in the boats and their contents lead experts to believe they were buried at the same time and possibly at the same event. Given the fact that they were filled with bodies, one can only guess it was a ceremonial tribute to the fallen men. Number 10. Dock Street Theater. The Dock Street Theater in Charleston is one of the most haunted, abandoned places anywhere in the state of South Carolina. And yes, like many abandoned places, there are credible stories that describe it being the site of paranormal activity. That's right, ghosts gather here. The theater opened in 1736 and was burned down by fire in 1740. It was replaced by another theater shortly after, which operated until around 1780. It was then replaced by the Planters Hotel in 1809. After the Civil War, the hotel became neglected. It was then damaged in 1886 by an earthquake. The decrepit building was left abandoned for about 50 years after the quake, with plans not coming into action until the 1930s to renovate it. But rather than turn it back into a hotel, the plan was to return it to life as a theater. This theater remained open until 2007, when it was forced to close because it was in such horrible disrepair. It then sat abandoned yet again for 3 years before $19 million was spent to refurbish the Dock Street Theater. The theater is still running strong today, except for the fact that it's haunted by ghosts. After 350 years of turbulent history, decades sitting abandoned and disused, there are plenty of lost souls trapped here. Guests at the theater have spotted spirits roaming the grounds, and even apparitions appearing on stage. Number 9. Convent of the Capuchos. The Convent of the Capuchos in Portugal is an abandoned Franciscan monastery located in the remote hills of Sintra. When the convent was built in 1560, the Franciscan friars who lived in it practiced a rudimentary lifestyle far from the rest of civilization. The monks took vows of austerity and lived in crude rock structures designed to blend in with the natural landscape. Their beds were made of stone, they slept in small quarters like jail cells, and they protected themselves from the elements with roofs and walls made from wood from the local trees. If it sounds like a miserable life, well, you just aren't appreciating how much some people can endure for their religions. The convent was active up until the 1830s, when these kinds of religious orders were banned in Portugal. So, the entire complex was abandoned, but it was never destroyed and can still be found today in the wilderness of Sintra. The whole place is ruined and in pretty poor shape, with trees growing out of the ceilings and wild animals living in the crumbling structures. Still, it has an eerie, kind of fantastical vibe about it, as if the ruins were left behind by a race of forest-dwelling elves. Number 8. Ancient Palace. Abandoned castles are scattered all over the world, but for most of them, there's a reasonable explanation for why they were abandoned. But here, the reason is more psychological than anything else. Back in the 18th century BC, there was a Canaanite palace at the site of Tel Kabri in what is now modern Israel. It was a huge palace, about 65,000 square feet and larger than most American shopping malls. It had a banquet hall, storage rooms filled with spiced wine, and hundreds of amazing paintings. Then at some point, for some reason that archaeologists can't figure out, the palace was abandoned and left vacant for thousands of years. In 2009, archaeologists began excavating this mysterious palace, hoping to find out what happened 3,700 years ago to make the political center of the Canaanites be suddenly abandoned by its inhabitants. The team of archaeologists were assisted by the National Geographic Society. They found no proof of any flood, and they didn't find any evidence of violence from an invasion. As it turned out, there had been an earthquake in 1700 BC that devastated the city. It didn't destroy it, but it was frightening enough to cause the thousands of people living here to run for their lives and never return. They probably believed that God was telling them to abandon the city, and so they did. Number 7. Eastern State Penitentiary. The Eastern State Penitentiary was designed as the first major penitentiary in the world to be completely humane, but it turned out to be quite the opposite. In fact, this terrifying place drove men straight into the arms of insanity. Today, the penitentiary looks like a castle in the middle of urban Philadelphia. Prior to its opening in 1829, prisons in America were commercial ventures with almost no order, usually burdened by starvation, corruption, disease, and rampant violence. Most prisoners died before they could ever be released. Eastern State would change all that. It was developed by the Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons. Yes, that was the name of the society. Prisoners were supposed to turn into centers for reflection and rehabilitation, but it didn't quite live up to that dream. In the 1820s, this structure cost $800,000 to build. It was one of the most expensive projects of its time, and keep in mind, this was back when Andrew Jackson was the president and people were still using chamber pots. The prison was used for 142 years. Charles Dickens visited in 1842 and wrote that the penitentiary was cruel and wrong, that being a prisoner there was worse mentally than being physically tortured. In 1971, the Eastern State Penitentiary was shut down and abandoned. It sat neglected until 1994, when it was opened up to the public as a creepy museum. Number 6. Abandoned Cave. Near the city of Makarska in Croatia, there's an abandoned sea cave that used to be a nightclub. This was one of the hottest places for tourists to visit in the area. It had a full bar. It was lit up with blue neon lights in the evenings, and the sound of laughter and music floated out of the cave and over the sea. But overnight, it shut down. The place was pillaged. All of the equipment was taken out, and all that's left today is a sad old cave with a crumbling stone bar, a tipped-over beer fridge, and a lot of lost memories. As far as we know, funding likely ran out and the bar had no choice but to close down. Still, it was fantastic while it lasted, with parties literally being held inside of a cave at the edge of the Adriatic Sea. If you were to visit today, you'd find nothing but the sad remains of one of Croatia's best party destinations. Would you buy the abandoned bar cave and try to turn it back into a hip nightclub? How much do you think it would cost? It sounds like someone ought to try. Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. Then remember to subscribe to Talltanic if you haven't already for more intense videos. Number 5. Onping Treehouse. The Onping Treehouse began life as one of the biggest warehouses in the Onping district of Tainan, Taiwan. It was used for exporting sugar before being converted into a warehouse used by the Japan Salt Company during Japan's occupation of the island. After World War II, the warehouse fell into disrepair. It was abandoned and left to be reclaimed by nature. After all these years, the warehouse is now nothing more than some brick walls encasing the roots of a giant banyan tree. The roots are literally strangling the structure. They cover its walls, they've burst through its ceilings, and they wind through its windows like huge brown tentacles. You can even walk along the collapsed roof to see the warehouse from above and how the tree has completely taken it over. And yes, it's been dominated by only a single tree. Its roots are so prolific that they act like fungi, branching out and multiplying in all directions. Number 4. Portuguese Fortress. The ruins of a Portuguese fortress in East Timor is yet another strange abandoned place that's been reclaimed by nature. The story goes back to the 16th century when the Portuguese began trading with East Timor. By the end of the century, Portuguese immigrants had turned it into their very own colony. This territory didn't become independent until 1975. Even afterwards, they didn't become their own country until 2002, after fighting with Indonesia for over 20 years. Still, the Portuguese ruled East Timor for roughly 500 years. During this time, they built plenty of military fortifications to protect their territory. Very few of these fortresses remain today, mainly because they weren't built very well and time took its toll. One of the most interesting forts still around is near the southern village of Suailoro, which was once the administrative headquarters for the Portuguese occupation, as well as a prison. The fort is on a beach with only a few chunks of wall still remaining. It's also being reclaimed by a hungry banyan tree, just like the Onping Treehouse. But even though the ruined fortress looks like a fascinating place to explore, it's not recommended because the area is crawling with crocodiles. You might get some good pictures, but you might also be eaten by giant reptiles. Number 3. Haunted ruins. The Mayan ruins of Xunantunic in Belize are believed to be haunted. These ruins can be found deep in the remote jungle, abandoned for well over a millennium. It was in the year 1000 when the Mayan people who once lived there packed up their stuff and left, probably following a devastating earthquake that prompted a sudden evacuation of the city. This earthquake also caused serious damage to the large pyramid in the center of the old city. After the earthquake, Xunantunic was reoccupied by a handful of people for about 300 years before they too disappeared. Since then, it has remained empty and at the mercy of the encroaching jungle. The ghost story appeared for the first time in 1893, after explorers rediscovered the lost city. It was a man doing research on the site who first described seeing a Mayan maiden descending the staircase of the Great Pyramid in a flowing white gown. She also had eyes that were red like hellfire, and the man said he felt them piercing his soul. Before he could catch her, though, she disintegrated into thin air. The sightings of this ghostly maiden go on for another century, with people even today reporting encounters with the mysterious Mayan ghost. Number 2. Al-Jazirat Al-Hamra. Al-Jazirat Al-Hamra is a ghost town by every definition. It wasn't always like that though, as this place used to be a pearl fishing village, with its citizens quite prosperous. There were houses, schools, mosques, and bustling marketplaces. Today, these buildings are all derelict shells that were abandoned when the United Arab Emirates struck oil, got wealthy, and began rapid urbanization. The history of the town goes back to the ancient Zab tribe. By the year 1831, they had made their little town into a pearl trading center. There were over 4,000 people here fishing and trading at the pier, with almost everyone sharing in the good fortune. But by 1968, as oil money began to dramatically change the landscape of the UAE, this village was forsaken. The few people who had been hanging on to their traditions packed up and left for the big city to cash in on the oil money, leaving their small village to be swept up by the desert. Number 1. Gorgona Island Prison Ruins. The ruins of the Gorgona Island prison are haunting. Gorgona is an island off the coast of Colombia, named after the mythical Gorgons from Greek mythology, creatures such as Medusa, who had snakes for hair and turned men into stone. It had been privately owned and cared for, but in 1959, Colombia declared it illegal for individuals to own their own islands inside the country. So Gorgona Island was turned into a maximum security prison, kind of like Alcatraz in the United States. The men incarcerated here had their names taken away and were given numbers, then forced to live in inhumane conditions with no chance of escape. If you think trying to get out of Alcatraz was bad, Gorgona Prison was even worse. Not only was the island infested with poisonous snakes, but the waters around the island were swamped with man-eating sharks. Out of the 25 escape attempts, only 3 of them were successful. The prison was ultimately closed down in 1984 and the island was turned into a national park. Scientists across the world recognize that Gorgona is a unique ecosystem, just like the Galapagos Islands. It's the only place in the world where the blue anole lives, the only completely blue lizard on the planet. It's also home to a bunch of monkeys, the brown-throated sloth, and of course, those venomous snakes that kept the prisoners from escaping. The remains of the prison are still there too, abandoned and somewhat spooky, in the middle of what is now an untamed jungle. Which of these abandoned places would you love to explore? Let me know your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to hit the subscribe button before you go. Come back again for more awesome videos from Talltanic. See you next time, bye!